Zoom too?
Yes, so I just opened up the thing and all the attendees are starting to join right
Can I share
now.
their live stream on your page? Because I don't know how to share. I can only share it if I'm only doing you, but I can't share the screen. I can't share both at the same time.
What do you mean?
Like your screen, like if I go Facebook Live on your
slides.
phone, your presentation slides they can't see.
Oh.
Because we're not in a big projector. I have the projector too. I bought it.
Well, you could just show it on.
How do I show you and it though at the same time?
I don't know. I think it's okay. For my life, I think it's okay. Because I think the people, like, I think what's dope is that in my network are a lot of abolitionists who do work from across the country. So like, for example, the other night when we did this, abolitionists from Michigan, from Iowa hopped on and we're adding to the conversation. So it was really beautiful. And I think like that would be the benefit of having my life.
Do you prefer that on your live that people see your face and just hear, or would you like us to join the Zoom call and then we show the screen and they can hear your
I think
voice?
you can do both. I think you can hand back and forth.
Okay.
Like I stay I don't try to not do a lot of slides with like a lot of words, right? I try to make it interactive. So I think it's fine. We should get started because we're already running over our time right here.
Can you do one thing though? Your Facebook.
Are you ready to get started now? Everybody feel good? Right. Or just abolition. Yeah. Ready, Martha? Okay. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. I just wanna thank everybody who's joining us for this workshop today. This important conversation. We're gonna have a conversation about abolition. Many have been hearing it talked about on a national scale now, which is really exciting for people like me who've been abolitionists for a really long time and planting seeds and doing this work across the country. And so I just really would like us to start first with a breathing exercise. So if you feel comfortable to stand, we honor all abilities. So if you need to lay, that's fine. If you need to sit, that's fine. For anyone else that wants to stand, you're welcome to stand with me. But we're gonna just do a little bit of a grounding breathing exercise so that we can just build some alignment with all of us across time and space as we're doing this work together, having this in this conversation. And so I just first want to make sure you can hear me okay. Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? All right, thank you. Okay, so we're gonna start first. Let's go ahead and get set. And we're gonna breathe deep into our core. We're gonna do the swimmer's breath. So we're gonna do in through our mouth, out through our nose. And this is gonna help us build energy for the conversation and help us feel grounded. And the first thing I would like us to do is I'd like us to stretch high, high, high. Stretch up high, high up to the ancestors. And we're gonna pull all of their wisdom in with us. And we're gonna stretch from side to side. We're gonna bring all of our people with us because everybody matters. We're gonna stretch low, 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 low down. And sometimes the work gets really heavy. We're gonna give back to the earth the things that are too heavy for us to carry right now today. We understand that things can be very heavy in this work and even in these conversations. And it's okay for us to give back to the earth the things that are too heavy, because the earth can handle it. And so we're gonna ground ourselves there. And I'd like us now to take a few breaths together. Again, we're going in through our mouth, out through our nose, and we're gonna breathe deep into our core. We're gonna try to build alignment. So I'm gonna breathe in with my hand going up and then out with my hand going down. So let's go ahead and do 5 breaths together. Thank you for that. I hope everybody feels nice and set now. I would like you to also know, I would like to speak out loud that sometimes these conversations can be very difficult. We're all colonized people in this country, and decolonization can feel like trauma. And for folks, I know there's a lot of folks that are already doing this work, and it's beautiful and amazing, but we're all at different spaces. So we want to honor all of the different places that people are decolonizing from. And we want to be able to hold each other as we go through this conversation. So if you need support, if you need a breakout room, or if you need somebody to call you to support you, go ahead and just say it in the chat on an inbox to Arte. And Arte will be able to signal to Monica and Stephanie, who can provide that support. So I just want to make sure that that is available for folks as well, and that you feel, everybody feels comfortable. So I would like to say a little bit about who I am. So I'm a community organizer. I've been organizing for, I don't know, maybe 25 years. I feel like I'm the people. I'm standing at the intersection of ethnicity. I'm Afro-Latina, Indigenous. My mom's side of the family comes from New Mexico and is deeply rooted here and has been right here in what is now Albuquerque since this was Mexico. My dad's side of the family is African Mexican and worked in the fields in the South and ate in Jim Crow kitchens. My dad, when he was 12 years old, was required to pick 400 pounds of cotton a day. These are the roots, the deep roots that I come from. And although it's an honor to have the power and the wisdom of my ancestors, we have all been in the struggle. I was an 8th grade pushout of middle school, Washington Middle School here in Albuquerque. I was an unsheltered, homeless teenager who slept in parks as a young person. I hustled dope when I was young. I was a teen mom. I had my first son when I was just barely 16 years old. I say all this because I know violence, but I've experienced great violence. I've experienced all of the symptoms of poverty and the lack of access. But I say this also because statistically, I shouldn't be sitting here before you right now, but I am. So I see every day as a gift going forward. Every day is a gift for us to be able to move our people forward, to continue to fight for liberation, to continue to organize for our people, for the power of our people, so that the next generations are more free than ours. We want our people to be freer. And ultimately, we would hope for self-determination and liberation for all of our people. So that is why I'm an abolitionist. I think it's important for me to speak that out loud about what has created the path for me to be here today. I also would like to acknowledge all of the great minds who have influenced my work over all of the many years, from the incredible mentors that I've had in the movement, from the Free Alabama movement, from Decarcerate Louisiana, my brothers in Angola prison, the lifers that are in San Quentin, the jailhouse lawyers. Oh, the jailhouse lawyers who are so phenomenal, every day putting in work for our people. My Millions for Prisoners family across the nation. Huge shout out to Crystal Roundtree, who started Millions for Prisoners in South Carolina. Building Power for Black New Mexico. We were and have been the Black Lives Matter organizers that started all those years ago when unfortunately Trayvon Martin was taken from us. And we started organizing then in the movement for Black Lives. And I think it's important that we acknowledge all of those things, especially the Black frameworks across time and space and Pan-Africanism who inform our work, who help to lead that work for liberation. And so I just want to honor all who have informed the work that we're doing today. I'm merely a vessel. I see myself as merely a vessel for all of the people who are behind the walls, all of the people who are still on slave plantations across the world and in the United States, and particularly for those who have gone on and who are holding space with us now as our ancestors. So I now would like us to go ahead and move into community agreements. And I'm gonna go ahead and read them out loud. And if people have questions or feel provoked or have comments, please feel free to use the inbox to go ahead and chat those. So our community agreements today as we work through this workshop. Our community is committed to working together in ways that resist rather than perpetrate the norms of white supremacy culture. Therefore, we will make the following promises to one another. 1, humility. We are all here to learn and grow, not show off or defend all of the things that we already know and do. We approach this work with a sense of curiosity and openness to rethinking what we thought we knew. Risk-taking. We are willing to jump into the messiness, whether or not we feel completely ready. Perfectionism is an illusion, and it will only hold us back from the important work that we have to do together. We are willing to take risks and make mistakes, knowing that making a mistake does not mean that we. Community. We are a team. This system was not built by one person in one day, and it will not be dismantled by one person in one day. We need one another, and we are stronger together. The growing edge. It is each of our jobs to find our growing edge and lean into it. White supremacy culture teaches us that white people are entitled to a sense of comfort, and that our collective pace must be dictated by their willingness and readiness to move forward. Instead, we understand that discomfort is at the root of all growth, accountable for impact. It is possible to have very positive intentions and still cause harm. Intentions and impact are two separate constructs. Therefore, we can safely assume that everyone in our community has positive intentions and that we will need to figure out how to respond to negative impact. So we will commit to step 1, acknowledging our impact. This might sound like, I'm sorry for. Step 2, taking an active role in repairing the harm. This might sound like, are you okay? What can I do to help? 6, restorative justice. Because we are all human, we can expect that mistakes will happen and that we will even unintentionally hurt one another. White supremacy teaches us that mistakes must be punished and that those who make mistakes are disposable. Instead, we commit to finding ways to restore relationships. We know that every last one of us has inherent value, and we are committed to finding ways to repairing harm while staying in community. because no one is disposable. Both and. We are complicated. The world is complicated. There are rarely only two options, good, bad, right, wrong, us, them. We strive to dig deeper and push beyond binary thinking. There is no one right way forward. Speak from the I. We are each impacted by racism in different ways. This means that we each have an important story to tell. You are the sole expert of your story. And also, there is no such thing as objectivity. Expect and accept a lack of closure. It's unlikely that we will end racism today and during this workshop in the hour that we've got left, just about. You might leave with more questions than answers. We might not even make it through these community agreements, but here we go. And I would especially like to call out and thank and credit Ijuma Jordan and Megan Madison for these beautiful community agreements that are so valuable to us in our work. They're very helpful for us to be able to identify the values that we are coming from. Values alignment in organizing is critically important, and it's a place that we almost frowned. Are there any questions about the community agreements right now?
Someone is wondering if they could get a copy of the community agreements. They say they love them. Estelle Berger.
Wonderful. Yes, they are available. You can find these incredible organizers online. They have a Facebook page, and they ask, I think it's for a $1 donation to be able to use them. And so anybody can get them. I can share them as well. And we can forward that donation for folks as well. So definitely encourage folks that feel aligned to please use them. That's what they were created for. So such an honor to know such brilliant organizers across time and space. Are you able to see the abolition presentation on the screen share? Let me try it again. How about now? Good? All right. So I would like also to just call out if folks have art supplies, pen and paper, coloring books, whatever feels good. Some people need hand stuff, so you might have Play-Doh or things you can tinker with. Sometimes there's things that we discuss in this conversation that might be provoking. They might cause you to write a dope verse for your next hip hop song. They might spark creativity for an art project. I just would like us to be able to always be open to all of the ways that our people, our community always self-expresses. So please feel free to do that. And if you do come up with something, would love for you to share in the Q&A if you feel good about sharing. So I also want to call that out as well. So let's be creative. I think that abolition requires us to have a broad imagination. We have not yet imagined the world that can be built that does not require prisons or police. And I say that because abolition has very little to do with prisons and policing. It has everything to do with building a society that does not require them. And that's what abolition is really about. It's about building power for our people, building strength for our community, to be able to no longer need these structures, these punitive structures, those slave catchers and plantations. So I encourage you to be bold and imaginative as we move through this conversation. Keep an open, big mind as we work through this. So a lot of folks will often ask me, Selinda, you say you're an abolitionist, but why not reform? I think it's important that we talk about reform, just so that we can ground ourselves about why abolition. Many do reform work in our community. We will dive deeper into why we are abolitionists and why we refrain from being reformists. We will discuss what abolition in the modern movement is and provoke ideas about those who may not be doing the work and those who are doing the work. We hope by the end of this discussion, you will have a deepened understanding surrounding abolition and perhaps a more aligned strategy, or at least an idea of how to engage with abolition. I think that it's important for us to acknowledge that reform is necessary sometimes. We cannot ignore the conditions that currently exist and pretend like it's not happening, that these systems of oppression are not happening. So I do election work, and I do run bills. We ran HB 57 2 years ago, the right to vote bill. When we ran that bill, we never thought that we'd have a bill number. We never thought we would have a bill sponsor, and we never imagined we would get through all the way to the last week of the legislative session. We ran that bill as a tactic, as organizers, to provoke the conversation about modern day slavery, to provoke the conversation about how Jim Crow law still exists. And this is why I think that there is room for reform work in the movement. I think what we have to ground ourselves in, though, is the reform that we're advocating for sustaining the structure, or is it helping to alleviate some of the oppression that our people are feeling? So as we have seen reform happen over this century, even if we just focused on just this century since 1865, we can clearly see that slavery has never ended. It has only evolved into what we know now as the prison industrial complex. It's the same narrative. It's exploited labor, restricted freedom, 3/5 clause, it's convict leasing, it's sharecropping. And all of these steps led to what is now the sophisticated machine that is the prison industrial complex. There's an entire economy, billion-dollar industry that comes out of the prison industrial complex. This is important for us to think about how slavery never ended, it only evolved. Jim Crow law is now what we would call felony disenfranchisement. It's a second-class citizenship. It has restrictions on movement, restrictions on participation in the society. Many people don't know, if you're a felon in this society, you can't even buy life insurance. You can't live in certain places. You can't get specific types of federal subsidies. You can't go to many universities. You're barred from grant programs. So there's a lot of different things that come out of the second-class citizenship that is Jim Crow law. And so it's only become more sophisticated and had a broader, it's spanned to a broader network. The Southern economy is now what we would call today's stock market. A lot of people don't know, but during slavery, Mississippi was the biggest producer of cotton and led global economy with the market that they had created. And so it's not very different. Capitalism appears this way, and it continues to evolve. So all of these things are merely tools of the structure of imperialism, of racist capitalism. And so when we do reform work, we're seeing that these same tools that uphold the structure only become more sophisticated and manifest into what is the next thing. I argue that lynching has been replaced with what we know now as state violence or police violence. It has the same impact. Lynchings were, if you look up the definition of a lynching, lynchings are intended to create fear in a society for control, for purposes of control. That is the same thing that law enforcement does now. So lynchings used to happen through vigilante violence more commonly during slavery, but today now it's contracted out to state employees who we call police officers. And we're going to dive deeper into what modern day policing has become. But I think it's important for us to be thinking from that framework when we're talking about reform versus abolition. And so I often will always push back about reform work because I think that it's a dangerous slope. Reform work has most certainly got us to a more sophisticated system, a more oppressive system. And just so that folks, I don't know if folks are familiar or have read, I just want to say out loud that there was an intentional loophole that was left in the 13th Amendment. And this loophole was to allow the Southern economy to continue. Lincoln never intended to end slavery. That is not true, it's not real. But I want to read out loud the 13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. It clearly says that slavery still exists. Slavery is still legal. It is a global economy. It has never ended. I think that's really important for folks to ground in because it informs why we're abolitionists. We stand on the shoulders of the abolitionists who were before us, the Harriet Tubmans that were before us. It's really important that we understand the massive structure that we're dealing with. We are still dealing with that same structure. So the country was founded itself on genocide and slavery. I'd like to provide an opinion that these systems of policing and prisons were developed as forms to control the poor and people of color while protecting the wealthy and their resources. Politicians in this country, including President Lincoln, never actually wanted slavery to end. Rather, he himself had benefited from free imposed labor. The widely celebrated, the 13th Amendment did not actually end slavery. A loophole was left in so that the systems of slavery would continue. The first United States prison was built by the Quakers in 1829. The theory was for a place of reflection, although they very quickly understood the mistake and became the first prison abolitionists. Abolitionists have always existed in this country and abroad since the first slaves met the coast of Virginia. Though the Quakers were not on the front lines of prison abolition, the movement for prison abolition has grown, and we see throughout our history has remained the undertone force against systems of oppression. I think it's most important to note that abolitionists in liberation movements have always existed and persisted. Far too often, Black suffering is lifted without the discussion of resistance, and that has always existed, and abolition has always been in the soul and the spirit of these movements. I would further like to provoke you to understand that racism itself is a social construct, and it's not based on any biological or scientific truth. It is the primary organizing mechanism, though, of the society of the United States. In other words, though race isn't real, it is the basis of our reality. So I just want to say that one more time. The concept of race is a social construct that was created to uphold white imperialism. So although race isn't real, it is the basis of our reality. European colonizers established the concept of whiteness in the British colonies of North America to legitimize domain over African slaves and consolidate control of stolen indigenous land. The defined white as anyone without a drop of African or indigenous blood. The triple weapons of genocide, colonization, and slavery combined to create a definition of white that put European colonizers in power, with no room for autonomy or self-determination for people of other races. So I know that was a lot. Are there questions, thoughts that we want to acknowledge now or dig deeper on for a moment?
So Selinda, I actually had a question, sorry. Like as you were
Yes.
talking about the 13th Amendment, I thought that was really poignant. I do remember there's like another amendment, I think it's the 8th Amendment, that says that cruel and unusual punishment is not allowed in this country. Slavery seems like the cruelest punishment. So I'm just trying to sort of reconcile that and how like people can just go about daily life not like recognizing that the prison complex is just, it's cruel and unusual. So why is it still around? It contradicts.
Yeah, so, and we're gonna dig deeper on that, but really what the answer to that is, right, is, and I usually do this as a survey as when we're in a big room together, is this structure that was created for white men over 21 who were landowners and Protestant. So just here on this call, how many people would fit that demographic, right? White men over 21 who were landowners and Protestant. So that is who this structure was built for. So this structure was never intended for us. All those things they wrote down as the freedoms and liberties were never intended for us. They were intended for them. And that's the piece, that's the disconnect, right? That shows us that we cannot assimilate into a structure that was never designed for us. And that is why it must be dismantled. That is how it must be dismantled for us to imagine being able to create the thing that wouldn't be all inclusive for all of the peoples of the United States. And so this is the disconnect that happens so often, and we run into that wall often, right? Where we try to access the courts and look for justice in a system that wasn't for us. And we'll talk deeper about this too, because this leads into the conversation that often we end up at is how do we, what does it mean when we call out for justice in the United States, in these structures?
Thank you.
So I do want to talk about the history of policing in the United States. I think that it's very important for us to understand the historical perspective of how policing came to be. So capitalism in the United States, political, economic, and social systems rely on sustaining forced free labor and profiting from the bodies of the people of color and the poor. So that historical perspective shows us, I'm sorry, my slides are out of order in my, so during my intro, I said a very controversial statement to some, not all, because some of us are already doing this work. But I want us to revisit the narrative of that statement with a deeper analysis. So police and prisons exist only to protect the wealthy and their resources and to control people of color and the poor. That is their fundamental role in the society. So I want to talk about how law enforcement came to be. So the first constables with duties very similar to today's sheriffs were around at least since the 9th century. And they traveled to the Americas from Europe to supplant the systems that existed there at the time in the 1600s. Their function was more like conflict resolution. It was more of like a civil, what our civil courts would do today. disruptions about who owns what or disputes. But law enforcement then evolved into what we saw in 1704, which is what more closely connected to what we exist in the society today. So in 1704, the colony of Carolina developed the fledgling United States First Slave Patrol. As you can see, there's an image on the top left corner of one of the slave patrol's original badges. This is what the vigilantes wore when they were doing their activities as slave catchers. The slave patrols consisted of roving bands of armed white citizens who would stop, question, and punish slaves caught without a permit to travel. This still exists today. Clifton, while he was on probation and parole, my husband, he could not leave the county of Bernalillo without a travel permit. So the very same systems still exist. They were civil organizations controlled and maintained by the county courts. The way the patrols were organized and maintained provided a later framework for preventative rather than reactive community policing, particularly in the South. Centralized and bureaucratic police departments focused on the alleged crime-producing qualities of the dangerous class. They began to emphasize preventative crime control. The presence of police authorized to use force could stop crime before it started by subjecting everyone to surveillance and observation. The concept of the police patrol as a preventative control mechanism composed the insertion of police into the normal daily events of everyone's life, a previously unknown and highly feared concept in both England and the United States as it was being colonized. The evolution of modern law enforcement this is where we've arrived with the evolution of modern law enforcement. And I want to also talk about Border Patrol. I think it's important that we understand. I remember with all of the heightened activity at the southern border when more and more people were being captured and ICE activities were heightened with this current administration. People were in awe and shock to see vigilantes at the border capturing people and holding them for the Border Patrol. But that is actually where Border Patrol came from. It started with vigilantes at the border. It started with vigilantes that patrolled out of El Paso and as far west as California, and their role was trying to restrict the flow of illegal Chinese. They were put in place to maintain minority quotas in immigration. And so when we think about this system and the way it's behaving right now and the things that we're experiencing, this is not new. This is literally the soul of this country. We are dealing with a centuries-old oppressive tool. And so these things are not new. They are only evolved and more sophisticated. ICE is just a more evolved and sophisticated system of what began the U.S. Immigration Service in 1904. I think it's also important for us to recognize that police duties since the 1800s can be easily traced along the ebbs and flows of political pressures as well as social issues. And that's important for us to hold in context, right, about why reforms can often lead to the evolution of these systems. Because those political structures are influencing how the structure is going to behave, how it's going to evolve. And so based on this historical context, I argue that modern policing has not changed, but has become more enhanced and militarized with further advancement of weapons against citizens, from high profile invasions of privacy that would have never been tolerated under the theory and the protections said to have been provided under the Constitution and Bill of Rights. This in itself is oxymoronic. So the way the system exists right now is in direct conflict with what the people who wrote those documents, the Constitution and Bill of Rights, actually were. And so that is in contrast with itself. And that is what we're dealing with in this structure. Is everything okay? Oh, I'm sorry for all of the ringing in the background. There's some kids that are excited to network with Monica. So, of course. I don't know, you know what? Can I just take a quick pause? I'm gonna stop my screen share because I'm having an issue with my slides.
Of course, no problem.
Thank you.
No problem. In that kind of intermediate time that we've got now, if folks have, you know, things that they've thought of or questions or reactions, if you want to send them in the Q&A or the chat, I can try to communicate them. And it's also just good to kind of get this going. Well, Selinda's, I think you with that problem.
Are you okay? My apologies. Things are a little out of order. I've done some consolidated workshops before, and I think that's what had happened. So sorry about that. Okay.
Hey, Selinda, just to let you know kind of what's going on in the Q&A. A lot of people just hitting you with a lot of compliments. I think everyone's really enjoying it.
Oh, good.
Becca was wondering, she says she's not familiar with the term vigilante. If you could, I guess, maybe explain that.
Yeah, so the term vigilante is basically a person who takes it upon themselves to step into the role of enforcement. And we see that now a lot with, here in New Mexico, we have the civil guard, right? The militia civil guard, and they train and they believe that their role is to be enforcers in the society. We have, this has always been where people could step up and say, I'm gonna support law enforcement in this capacity, and they volunteer to be, hold the role, that role in the society. And so we talk now also about what we experience with vigilante violence, which is people who take it upon themselves to act in a manner to control people of color and the poor. We've seen it, many of the actions that have happened across the United States, where even George Zimmerman, I think, might be a great example of what vigilantism is. So Zimmerman decided that he wanted to be the police. He was the community watch person for his neighborhood who chose to attack Trayvon Martin and ultimately shot him to death because he believed that he had a responsibility to protect his community from a Black boy in a hoodie and saw him as a threat. And so when we talk about vigilantes, it's people who empower and their own selves to hold this role in this society. And this is literally where policing was born from, was birthed from, both with Border Patrol, with military. I have a different workshop that I do talking about the military and its roots and origins and how it interconnects with the prison industrial complex. Maybe we can do that one another time. But definitely all of these systems were all born out of vigilantism, where somebody in the society believes that they have a role and a responsibility to assert control over others. And that's what we would call a vigilante. So I hope that was helpful. So I want to talk about, I know a lot of the time I provoke people when I say, I want to burn the prisons. And I know a lot of people are like, okay, Selinda, that sounds great. But then, like, what are you proposing? Do you think we should just open all the prison doors and let everybody out? And I say, well, yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea. I think we should. But I also understand that we cannot ignore the fact that there are predators. There have been predators in the society always. A lot of them have held tremendous power and control and have never been in a prison. I often argue that when you see a predator, most often predators specifically in a prison system setting, or that are living in an oppressed neighborhood, you'll often, if you heard their stories, you would often quickly realize that they have been some of the most victimized persons in the society. And they became predators as their own way to sustain their own lives. And I try to acknowledge that whenever we're having this discussion. You know, there's a whole nother workshop, another talk that we do where I talk about this triangle structure that the society tells us about. The criminal justice system tells us that we can be predators, we can be, or offenders, sometimes are referred to, we can be victims, or we can be saviors. The system sees itself often as a savior. A lot of people who do victims' rights works see themselves as saviors. And so the structure tells us we should be one of these three things, and that is all we can be. The truth of the matter is that we are all of those things at different points of our lives. We have all done harm, even unintentionally, and we have all helped to be a savior for folks before. We've all banded together to build community defense for each other. And sometimes we've been harmed. So I argue that we in our society as humans, that we're more like a spiral as we function in these systems. And so for us to strictly say that a person can only ever be and will only ever have the experience as a predator, I think is a big miss. It's a farce, because that's not real. That is not a real experience for any human. And so I just want to offer that as we enter this conversation about what it would mean if we opened all of the prisons and burned the plantations down, and what then would we do with the folks who have done harm. And I just want to really call out the work of Angela Davis here in Critical Resistance, because they actually have an entire workshop on abolitionism where they dig deep into this. And historically and around the world, systems of restorative and transformative justice have always been in practice for our people for centuries, as long as we can go back in our humanity. Our ancestors didn't have the structures of policing and prisons, and they were okay. And so we know that it's possible. Systems of punitive punishment, systems of these systems of punishment are fairly new in the world, and they are constructs developed to advance systems of capitalism and imperialism. While we understand there are humans who do heinous acts in our society, we also understand clearly that no human is the worst thing that they've ever done. No murderer is only a murderer. no person who's done a robbery is only a robber. No person who is addicted is only an addict, and addiction is a health condition. And so we have to acknowledge those pieces, the complexity of what that means. The overwhelming majority of people behind the walls in the United States can be welcomed back to the community and restored to full participating community members, and in fact will. About somewhere in the 90% range of all prisoners in the United States at some point will come back to the society. So we have to remember and think about who do we want returning back to the society when they return. Prisons and jails are violence. Violence can never be healed with violence. And these only create systems and structures of infinite violence. We understand that some humans struggle immensely with significant issues, whether mental health, extreme sociopathic tendencies, etc., that make it difficult for them to function in the society. For this small population, we advocate for hospitals and safe community spaces. We also understand that through community healing measures, we can do significant harm reduction work with non-punitive systems. Jails and prisons are violence. I'm gonna say it again. How have we come to believe that if I am harmed in the society, I should use the apparatus of the state to exude violence upon my predator, and that somehow would equate to justice? Violence to address violence only ensures infinite violence. It prevents our communities to ever heal, and more importantly, for offenders, to ever be welcomed back to a society that has not only casted them out, but imposed the same harm that we as a society said was immoral. So we know our imagination has not yet realized what abolition could look like, but it is up to us to develop those systems that care for all humanity, even for those who have done harm in a manner, and to do so in a manner that respects all humanity. That was heavy, I know. So I'd like to encourage us as we're thinking about that, because I think this is also a place in the conversation that we're thinking about times that we have been harmed. Whether it was the police who harmed us and we wanted them to be punished, or whether it was somebody in the society who robbed our home or broke our things, or who punched us or hurt us or shot us. There's been times that we've been harmed, and we have been colonized to believe that this system can bring us justice. And I know that I am provoking a conversation here that says that that's not real, and I'm challenging that, the truth of that notion. And so I know that that can be heavy, especially for people who have been harmed traumatically in this society. So I just would like to encourage everybody, let's just take a moment to take 3 big breaths. Deep into our core. Again, we're gonna go in through our mouth, out through our nose. We're gonna just breathe together 3 times. I just want to sit there for a moment and invite anybody who has, we're going to dig deeper. This is not done here, but if there's something that you need to get off your chest right now, something that you just want to offer to the conversation, I want to go ahead and welcome that for about 2 minutes.
There is a question. It says, what is your opinion about Obama's approach of reducing drug crime sentences?
So substance abuse issues, whether it's alcoholism or something that they have deemed illegal in the system, are medical issues. They're medical issues the same way as bad eating habits lead to health conditions. They're not crimes. They should have never been crimes. And in fact, the drug war was created as a tool to increase slavery, the slavery economy in this United States. So no human who is addicted, who is in prison because of their medical condition, that should never have been. So I would never say reduce, I would say free. They must be freed, and they must be offered free and unlimited health care to be able to heal from their health condition that exists. The overwhelming of people who are addicted, it happens because often they're masking or substituting for a mental illness that's not being treated, or because of trauma. Trauma is the #1 issue as to why people self-medicate. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, especially because we know that the overwhelming majority, something like 97% of prisoners in the United States are there because of drug crimes. We could almost disappear the prison class if we were to just stop criminalizing drugs of any kind. Violent crimes only account for a very, very small percentage of the entire prison population. There are 2.3 million bodies behind the walls in the United States, and something like 6.8 million people who are on some kind of probation or parole. That is a massive number of people. And the overwhelming majority of them are there because of the war on the drug war that was created as a tool, as a mechanism to create a war on people and generate an economy. So they should be freed. We'll go ahead and we'll move forward. Or did you have one more?
There's one more question that connects to that one.
Sure.
It says, I believe in defunding the police and moving towards abolition. But one thing is hard to answer. What will we get done for justice? And Brianna and Elijah, how does justice look like for people who have been murdered by the police?
Yeah, so I think I would like to pause that question for the end, for the Q&A, if that feels okay. All right. So I want to talk about this concept of restorative and transformative justice for just a moment. Often you'll hear abolitionists point to these structures because they're sort of already at play for us. I don't know where to put this. Okay. I'm trying to get it out the way. Okay. The idea behind abolitionism is that it is not necessary to have a punitive system of punishment. Rather, that we are capable of killing and intellectually engaging our struggling community members. We often argue that those behind the walls are the most victimized members of this society. I would like to introduce two theories often championed in abolition movements, and those are transformative and restorative justice practices. As we advance the abolitionist movement, we should be creative and imaginative about what our communities actually need to address safety and harm. We should be thinking about our ancestors who dealt with harm in a time where there were no prisons or police. What were those practices and how did they work, and what is yet to be imagined? So transformative justice is a system that is against punishment and for accountability, healing, and community liberation, and acknowledging identity and oppression. Now, I also want to offer just what we call Justice Umbantu. This is, it comes from tribes in Africa. In certain regions of South Africa, when someone does something wrong, he is taken to the center of the village and surrounded by his tribe for 2 days while they speak all of the good that he has done They believe that each person is good, yet sometimes we make mistakes, which is really a cry for help. They unite in this ritual to encourage the person to reconnect with his true nature. The belief is that unity and affirmation have more power to change behavior than shame and punishment. This is known as Umbantu, humanity towards others. Now, restorative justice has been adopted by the systems and structures as they exist now. And so often you'll hear some revolutionary DAs who've taken office talk about pre-prosecution deals that they're willing to make so that people don't become felons. I think all of that is good and honorable work. I think it's a way that we can absolutely deal with the conditions that currently exist. But it also does not end how people are cycled into these systems. And I think that's what's important when we're thinking about how the system is trying to adopt these systems. And also with an acknowledgement and that the system itself, the structure itself profits from these kinds of reformative systems. And so I want to just talk a little bit about, let's see, I think I have a slide for it. I want to talk a little bit about transformative justice. And the model that you're seeing on your screen right now actually comes from our group, Save the Kids from Incarceration. It offers elements of transformative justice practices, and we introduce these a lot into school structures and settings. Juvenile justice systems will often use these structures to say that they're doing something different than putting kids in cages and in the trash. But we argue that they're obviously not doing it effectively because the system must be dismantled. So transformative justice, I just want to credit this definition to Community Accountability and Transformative Justice Collective. The question that was posed was, how do we address violence within our own communities? We were told to call the police and rely on the criminal justice system to address violence within our communities. However, if police and prisons facilitate or perpetrate violence against us rather than increase our safety, how do we create strategies to address violence within our communities, including domestic violence, sexual violence, and child abuse that don't rely on police or prisons? Community accountability is one critical option. Community accountability is a community-based strategy. Rather than a police prison-based strategy to address violence in our communities, community accountability is a process with which a community, a group of friends or family or church or workplace, an apartment complex, a neighborhood, work together to do the following things. They create and affirm values and practices that resist abuse and oppression and encourage safety, support, and accountability. They provide safety and support to community members who are violently targeted that respects their self-determination. They develop sustainable strategies to address community members' abusive behavior, creating a process for them to account for their actions and transform their behavior. They commit to ongoing development of all members of the community and the community itself to transform the political conditions that reinforce oppression and violence. We offer some elements of transformative justice. They're not punitive and they're not or reformist. Personal and group identities are honored. They challenge systems of oppression. They create safe space for meeting and equality of power, responsibility and healing and accountability, self and group determination, collective action and co-facilitated meetings, creativity, they're voluntary, personal and group education sharing, and they allow for listening and reflecting. And they allow for the personal and the group experiences to exist cohesively. And so I just want to call out that there are a lot of places in the society where we already don't call the police. In our communities, in our neighborhoods, people who are on probation and parole, people who are undocumented, all across this country are already doing these practices because they already aren't safe to use the structure under this concept of serve and protect. And so we already do these things. And so I do want to offer that just to acknowledge how possible it is. Clifton and I have been doing this work in our community for a long time. We have a lot of relationships across our city and across the state, even in other states. People often would land on our doorstep who were having family disruptions, situations that could lead to domestic violence. And it looked like us sometimes giving one of the members of the family a place to sleep for the night so they could have some separation, but also have a safe place to be held. It requires us to use the medicines that are natural to us, like sage and cedar for protection and spikenard and all of the healing remedies, lavenders. And we have so many healing tools that the earth gives us everything that we need for healing. And honoring that in the space, but also being able to be people who are not punitive, who are open-minded, and who are able to listen and hold people through trauma. One of the biggest things, fallacies that happens in our society is that that people shouldn't have trauma, or that you know, there's no such thing, violence shouldn't exist. Well, you know, I argue that violence exists always. I mean, the act of cutting a tree down is violence to the earth. Things like killing an animal for humans to consume for nourishment could look like violence, but this has always been natural order in the earth. So this concept that violence is a bad thing or should not exist is not real. And it has everything to do with how we hold each other through trauma, and that violence often in the society we exist in is a condition, it's a symptom of people in the struggle. So when people are violent in their own communities, in their own neighborhoods, often is stemming from them being in some form of struggle. Their basic needs aren't being met. They don't have housing. They don't have proper food and nourishment for their bodies. They are dehydrated, don't have access to clean water. They might not have access to restrooms. They might not have access to healthcare or education or transportation, or their family relationships that connect them. And so when we see people acting and behaving in a violent manner, often it's people who are in the struggle. And so I often say that violence is a symptom of people in the struggle. So if we could identify that and help to hold them with the things that they need, often a lot of those symptoms would disappear. When a family cannot feed its children, we'll see domestic violence spike. When a family cannot maintain their shelter because they're being evicted or otherwise being pushed out of their home, their roof broke, or they cannot fix their home. These are the kinds of stressors often that will lead to domestic violence. Financial distress often leads to these symptoms. And so I just want us to be able to think about that broadly and think about how much could be eliminated if all of the society's basic needs were met. Basic needs. So this is why programs like community defense and mutual aid are so useful in this conversation and important, because we're already doing these things. When we're able to provide the support to our neighbors, to our community members, so that they're held through times of struggle and they know that they're not alone, a lot of these kinds of things that become violence will disappear in the society. I think that here is where we can speak a little bit about state violence. So, you know, I often, when I think about state violence and I think about killer cops, I know, because I understand that this structure, this system was never meant for me. I can never ask it to bring me justice. That cannot happen, that's not real. We know that there are two structures in the society that exist. There's the structure for the privileged class, the imperialist class. We just saw Roger Stone be pardoned with the justification of COVID. But we have just right here in Otero County, one of the biggest hotspots in the United States for COVID cases, and not one of those prisoners has been freed. And so we understand that there are two structures in the society that exist. There's one for the wealthy and there is one for the rest of us. And so I think it's important for us to understand that when we're saying, what does justice look like? What would it mean to achieve justice? And also to know that killer cops are nothing more than a tool. So they are humans who have been introduced and indoctrinated into a system and brainwashed into the belief that they are justified in killing us and enslaving us. That is what they are. They are like a tool. They are like the hammer that is being used. They are not the thing that is causing our harm. The thing that is causing our harm is the structure that has colonized them to believe that they are empowered, and the structure that empowers them to do that harm. That is what we are up against. So it's not the individual killer cop who we should be so concerned with. It should be the system that has permitted and empowered him to become a killer cop. Because inherently, all of them really are. They're killing us by holding us down with their bodies and their knees on our necks until we are not able to breathe anymore. That's real. We have a I can't breathe story right here in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the Metro Detention Center from last year. And I just want to speak his name out, Vigilante Violence. Vigilante Violence. We've worked with his family, and just a year ago, 6 officers, correctional officers inside of the Metro Detention Center here in Bernalillo County held him in the exact same hold that George Floyd was held in, and Vicente was murdered by those correctional officers. Those correctional officers have never even missed one day from work. They've never been held accountable. And so as we move into this conversation of accountability and what that looks like, that's different for what we would hold, how we hold each other, how me or Monica or Stephanie or how we would hold each other accountable for harm is different than an entire imperialist structure that is behaving to enslave us and profit from our bodies. And so we cannot ask that system that is oppressing us to bring us justice in this manner. And so when we talk about these systems that are harming us, I believe the remedy is to abolish them. This is why I'm a police and prison abolitionist. I think that police should not be allowed to come into our neighborhoods to murder us. I think that we as a community can organize community defense in a manner that keeps them out of our neighborhoods. If anybody's ever seen some of my cop watches before, we run police out of our neighborhoods all the time. And in fact, we just did last night. We ran police out of our neighborhood in the southeast of Albuquerque. And so it is possible. These structures, these systems, this vision is possible. We're doing it in small cells here and there already. But the big work is, how do we make this our structure in our society, where it's accessible to everybody, where anybody in the society would have somebody to call that's not 911 if they're having a problem and they need support. What does that look like, and how do we create it? So I think that it's really important for us to be thinking about that as we're moving through this conversation with this broad imagination. And this is part of what our community defense has been talking about. How do we create that, that phone number, that place where people are able to reach out? And we already do this work. So community members like Vicente Viola's family, we connected with them when Vicente Viola was murdered, and have been able to support that family as they've been moving through how to combat a system that murdered their loved one. And we help people all the time whose loved ones have been murdered by the police or have been harmed by police in prisons. And so the work is already being done. And so we should continue this conversation because we have not yet imagined what it could look like. I think that young people in particular have broad vision for being able to say and think about, you know, often you're less colonized than older folks in the society. And I think that it's so important that you're having this thought process to be able to be a visionary for this movement. So I have this this piece that usually we would do a breakout if we were in a workshop in a big room together. We did not set up for this breakout for sake of time, but also just because of the conditions that we're existing in. But I hope that you all will still work through this exercise with me individually, and you can take your own notes. The probing questions are, why are you doing or interested in doing abolitionist work? Or why aren't you? How does being or not being an abolitionist connect you to your political identity? What about abolition are you uncomfortable with? Or what are you excited about? So just thinking about those questions as we're gonna move in to the Q&A. But the most important thing I do wanna call out is the components of identity that help to inform how we think about these things. It's important for us to acknowledge that our career or our jobs, you know, what pays our bills has an influence. Our political views, our religious beliefs, our relationships, our ethnic identity, our personality, our body image, our values, interests, where we spend time in the society. All of these things are important because they help to inform how we think about these things, how we think about what is possible, how we think about how we process the concepts that we provoked in this conversation. And so I just want us to really be grounded there. I think also, I just want to acknowledge, you know, a lot of us, I don't know, we didn't do a survey at the beginning to see if we have a full values and beliefs alignment. I would guess that we probably don't. Just because every human is unique in their experience and everything around us influences our identity and our path. And so, for example, I have a Trumpster uncle who's brown person, who grew up here, who often has been extremely racist, and who had a career in the military and retired from the military base at Kirtland. And he believes in this administration, and he believes in the immigration policies that exist. And you know, so just so much to the fact that he'll challenge me at a graduation party for my niece. And so everybody has those family members. Everybody has that boss. Everybody has these people in our society. I love my uncle dearly. He's my godfather. He baptized me. I love him dearly, although our political beliefs and the way we align and move through the world are completely different. And I want us to always hold space for that, because we always should be leading with love, always leading with love and thinking about planting seeds. So I can have a direct conversation with my uncle, a political conversation where I'm gonna try to plant seeds with him, and hopefully there'll be experiences that will help that to grow, so that hopefully he can move along and stop being so oppressive in the world. Maybe he won't. We might not reach everybody, and that's okay. That's okay. And so I just always want us to have this set as we're thinking about how we move this work forward, and thinking about how we ourselves are decolonizing, how we ourselves are being influenced with all of the things, right? And so I think all of that is really important as we advance this conversation and into the Q&A. And so I do want to offer this space. Let me do a time check. Do we know? Yeah, so I think we just only have a few more minutes. But I do want to allow time and space for us to be able to debrief a bit and also have a conversation. So for folks who can stay on, I hope that you'll stay on. And let's go ahead and start working through some of the debrief and thoughts and wondering that we might be experiencing right now.
So can I start giving you the Q&A questions then? Is that okay?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, so I have like a order. So the first question is, how do we abolish police and prisons in a country with this many privately armed individuals?
So I'm not myself, I'm not anti-gun. I think that guns are just a tool like a screwdriver. And in fact, my entire family, even my children, are all trained how to use weapons to defend themselves, and all the way up to and including an AK. So I'm not anti-gun, I'm not anti-weapon, because I understand that it's not the weapon that is the problem, it's the human and their philosophies holding the weapon that can be the problem. And so I think as we're abolishing police and prisons, like I said, it has everything to do with the work in the society. So I don't know if we'll ever see prisons and police abolished in my lifetime, but I hope that the work that we're doing now will lead us to the path and will be freer in the next generation because of our work. And hopefully the next generations will not be mass murdered by state violence.
Thank you. So the next question is, I'd be interested in hearing some ideas / strategies for an abolitionist approach to emergency management and short-term immediate violence prevention. What police alternative resources do we have in our areas that we could be investing in?
Yeah, so we ourselves here in our organizing structure, we organize community defense already. So we see community defenses as many faceted, right? So we have Albuquerque Mutual Aid, where we're getting out resources to sometimes up to 50 families a day, dropping COVID safe resources from food to bleach, diapers, wipes, hygiene products, specific care packages for unsheltered community to help meet their needs. And we're doing that, dropping that at their door to help alleviate some of the pressures of the society right now. And then we have layered into that, we have street medics who often will help and respond when we're doing cop watch activities or organizing big events or actions, who are able to respond when the community needs medical support. So we do have that structure as well. They can help to sustain and help stabilize. We do harm reduction, whether it's needle pickups, making sure that condoms are accessible to people in the society, making sure that people have access to naloxone and those kinds of tools to help them to reduce the harm that's happening in our society. We also have teams that do cop watch actively to help be disruptors and push police, run them out of our neighborhoods to help protect our people. In the southeast of Albuquerque, I think it's important for me to mention that why cop watch is so heightened for us is that there are 5 layers of policing that happen in our community. We have the federal sting operation, Relentless Pursuit, happening in the southeast of Albuquerque. We are one of 7 cities that was named and targeted under Attorney General Barr in December. With full knowledge that a pandemic was coming, they still pulled the trigger on Relentless Pursuit and attacked our community, spending $71 million in militarized policing and federal enforcement in our communities. We have federal CIs rampant in our community, from DA to FBI to ICE and Homeland Security. Homeland Security spends, what is the number, 71 billion, $1.7 billion in Bernalillo County alone in Bernalillo County. Homeland Security spends that. We also have Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department Sheriff Manny Gonzalez in Bernalillo County still refuses to put cameras on his officers. He still has very high kill rates. His officers have very high kill rates. So it's important for us to run them out of our neighborhoods. We have state police. Michelle Lujan Grisham sent state police to the southeast of Albuquerque over these months. We also have APD, who's under the DOJ consent decree for 6 years now and has not made any improvements on their kill rates or on their training of officers or their CIT teams. And so Cop Watch is a critical tool for us to be able to be disruptors from bodies being stolen from our community, but also for state violence. The more eyes and cameras we have rolling at a scene, hopefully will reduce the amount of community members that are harmed by state violence. And when I talk about state violence, we have another workshop for this too, is about even child CYFD, even Homeland Security, even ICE, and how do we protect from all of these systems of state violence. And so all of these different pieces are pieces of the puzzle of building the world that we want to live in that does not require these systems. And it's although it takes work, it takes community building and community organizing, the fruits of this labor and what this system looks like is brilliant and it's beautiful. And imagining a world where all of our community members' needs are met is possible. We have the resources and we have the knowledge and the tools to be able to build it. And so it's just about getting to work.
Thank you for that. So the next question, sort of on this vein of community work, is from what I've read about mutual aid, it seems like a way for us to support each other while we work together towards a world that does not require police and prisons. It seems so hands-on, helping raise bail, getting housing, legal support for families of the incarcerated, etc. However, I am in a very rural area and have yet to be successful in actually connecting to a mutual aid group. I would love to learn about any mutual aid in New Mexico and how it's working. And I know you sort of went into that a little bit. Certainly I can take answers offline if it doesn't fit into today's topic. This is from someone named Will. I figured it would be a good question to ask.
Yes, that's incredible. So I actually am very, very blessed to have been able to have the benefit of doing work in McKinley County and in rural New Mexico and Doñana as well. I've gone out and done work across rural New Mexico and even in Louisiana. I think that it's important for us to have this conversation about access. You know, often in rural New Mexico, they don't have even access to the Zoom line right now, right? Because they don't have internet or they may not have a stable telephone service. Often across the state, there's not even running water or electricity where some folks live. And McKinley County has put together a mutual aid program as well. There's 2 different mutual aid programs there that we're supporting. One of them does do the door-to-door, which is more complex and difficult. But we have comrades out there that even in the winter time, he loads up his truck with wood and he takes firewood to all of the places that don't have access to heat and water and electricity and supports them. And we have the food pantry in Gallup that distributes food boxes up to 200 a week to folks. And in those food boxes, they put political education sometimes about what does the census mean for them or who's on the election ballots at the chapter house. And so they're able to spread information that way and network that way. The other mutual aid project in McKinley is the McKinley Mutual Aid Project. And that one, I think community members have to come to pick up food from them. But it's still a form online that they can sign up for. Zuni has, in Zuni, New Mexico, they also in the Pueblo, they have their own food pantry where they distribute political education, provide gas stipends, provide food for their community members. And so this mutual aid, this concept of mutual aid is very, very deep rooted in us as people of color and indigenous peoples, because this is actually the society that we mostly know. We are, in our humanity, We are a wolf pack. We do, when we align in nature, we align as a wolf pack. We align as a colony, as a bee colony. And this is how we flourish, is by that unity with each other, that network, building those connections. And so these are all the different ways that we look at, you know, in organizing a rural community. You know, we'll do telephone trees. We do telephone town halls sometimes. And sometimes the families will get into their cars and have to drive to the top of the hill so that they can get enough signal so that they can join us on a call, you know. And so often, you know, it's not easy work. I would never suggest that this is easy work, but it is possible work. And the more people that join and the mighty army that you can build is incredibly powerful. The power of the people is phenomenal. And so I think that once you start organizing and start building your groups, you will quickly see just how powerful that is.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to tie these two questions together because they seem to be similar questions, and it's coming from a white audience member. As a white liberal coming to terms with their own racism, what role can I play in the abolitionist movement? And the other question is, I've often heard that white people don't have a place in this movement because it's not their movement. What does that mean?
Oh, so pump the brakes on that one. Don't ever fall into that fallacy. There is a place for everybody in the movement, and white people have just as much to gain from Black Liberation Framework as anybody else in the society. There is an important role for all abilities, for all races, for all peoples, privileged and oppressed. All of us need to be working in this way. And if you are somebody who identifies as white and privileged, your role may look like being an accomplice with us. It might be that you leverage your whiteness and your privilege to help advance others. And that happens often. You know, I always say that the most powerful people that we have in our movement right now are white women. White women can go to the prison gates and they can rally loud at the prison gates in a way that somebody who's on probation and parole, who are state property, cannot. You know, so you can, waging the power of whiteness and privilege for oppressed peoples is an important and necessary role in movement work. And there's not been a movement, a liberation movement, that did not include all classes of people, all races of people. And so there absolutely is. Now, I think what you always have to ground in, and this is where the missteps often happen, is that the person who is experiencing the oppression, so if you're fighting for prisoners, if you're fighting for children at the border, if you're fighting for transgender asylum seekers, those are the folks, that demographic is who should be front and center, pushed to the front and amplified in every way. That is your role as an accomplice, as an ally. Your role is to leverage your privilege and your power in the society to move those with no voice and no platform to the front and make sure that that is happening. There are going to be times when the Black transgender youth prisoner cannot get to the platform. They can't reach it, right? So there is a place for you to be their vessel. There is room for you to be their voice, to be their vessel, to be the person shouting into the microphone outside of the prison for them. That is important, important and valuable work. And so if you feel like you're still trying to find the place and you're still deconstructing whiteness and privilege and decolonizing, going into these spaces is the best place for you to be, because we should always be in a learning stance. I find myself in a learning stance every day. Every single day I'm learning, and often I'm learning from young people, the young people with all the fire and all the courage and the fearlessness to just go out there and go get it done. And we should all be learning from each other. We should all always be in a learning stance and be willing to be open-minded, to hear others, and to be able to hold space when people are decolonizing, when people are still trying to, you know, fall a little bit, like we talked about in the opening community agreements. You know, making mistakes does not mean we are a mistake, and nobody is disposable. Staying grounded in that is so important in our work. And I believe that that's what Huey Newton was talking about when he said, you know, he was a young person in the 60s, so the conditions were very different, but he was saying all power for Black people, all power for yellow people, all power for red people. He was talking about the consolidation of all of the people, and that everybody is important, everybody has power, everybody should be benefiting from this movement. And that's what that means. And when we lift the most oppressed person, everybody lifts. So white people have just as much to gain as everybody else.
Thank you for that. Okay, so the next one, I think I'll just sort of go through a list. So if privilege is afforded to one by race, yet wealth is the greatest influence on socio-political matters, where do poor white people fit in a system that wealthy elites dictate?
Yeah, I think that's an important topic to discuss. And I talk about this in my capitalism workshop a lot, because what we deal with in the United States right now has much to do with class, more so than race, and remembering that race is just one of the tools of white imperialism, of racial capitalism. It's just one of the many tools, and classism also is one of those tools, just like patriarchy is one of those tools. And so I think that when we enter these conversations, we can't get stuck on one of the tools, because that's not what we're fighting. We are not fighting racism. We are fighting racial capitalism. We are fighting imperialism. And Black and brown capitalists are just as dangerous as white ones. And so when we're talking about classism, this is where that conversation leads us to. That is the path. Because I'll never forget my comrade in Appalachia. I was at a workshop with him, and he does environmental justice work, and he calls himself a redneck. And he said, all real rednecks know that we have much more in common with Black Lives Matter than we ever will with the imperialist class. And so even our white comrades in Appalachia recognize that our liberation movements are aligned. And so I think it's about being able to deconstruct what the society tells us and all the ways that it divides us, to recognize that our liberation is all dependent on each other's liberation, and working from that standpoint. You know, the concept that just 4 individuals in the society own more than 50% of the wealth in the United States speaks volumes to this notion of classism and how it impacts all of us. We're all in the same struggle.
Thank you for that. So this question might come off a little controversial, just how I perceive it when I'm reading it. When it comes to replacing our current policing structure, how do we keep a community from entering into a vigilante justice paradigm? Oftentimes, communities can be the most reactionary. The history of the KKK came out of community policing.
So I would push back just a little bit that the KKK actually came out of community policing. The KKK had a different agenda. They had a different political agenda that's still being carried forward. And they do so, they've used lots of different tools. I often talk about the Daughters of the South, who were the women of the Ku Klux Klan, who post-Civil War took over our education system. So their political agenda is different than community policing. It's about sustaining colonization and whiteness. It's about sustaining the concept that white people are whole people and the rest of us are not. And so it's about superiority. So it didn't have to do with community policing, it had to do with white imperialism. And so community policing, when done correctly, has concepts of accountability. what we talked about as we moved through the conversation earlier. If somebody in my cop watch team was doing things that were dangerous or harmful or outside of our value system, outside of our community agreements, we would have a path to be able to call them in and hold them accountable and repair the harm and remind them that when they came to do this work with us, we had all agreed that this is what our values were, that we weren't going to do harm. Intentionally or unintentionally, we would do our best to not do harm, right? And so I think that as we talk about what this looks like, all of the tools have to be in place. So we have to hold space for restorative and transformative justice to take place as we're community policing, as we're holding each other accountable, as we're feeding our community, as we're running police out of our neighborhoods. It's all done collectively. And so, yes, absolutely, humans can feel power in these structures and can sometimes need to be called back in and reminded that Wetico, this, I don't, if folks aren't familiar with Wetico, but this concept, right, of individualism is part of colonization, and it's not real. It's not real, and sometimes we have to deconstruct and decolonize again from those structures. And so often when we see community members who fall into that structure of ego, this is where we would have to call them back in. And one of my taglines in the organizing workshop is I talk about, if when your ego has become bigger than the movement, you are no longer useful to the movement. That is everything when we're talking in this conversation.
Agreed. So on that vein, somebody has asked, his name is Ernesto, how can a person get involved in Cockpitch in Albuquerque?
Yeah, so just inbox us, or you can inbox me on Facebook, Building Power for Black Mexico page, Millions for Prisoners page. You can also, if you don't have social media, on Facebook or Instagram, we have Instagram handles as well with IWOC. You can also email us at millionsforprisonersnm@gmail.com. And we have onboarding processes. So we do vetting process, and then we will do a one-on-one, and we'll go ahead and get you onboarded and teach you, because we want everybody to have these skills. We want the whole society should be trained in how to interact safely with state violence so that we can all be protected. So yes, the masses should be trained.
Thank you for that. So going back to the Brianna and Elijah question, I believe in defunding the police and moving towards abolition, but one thing that is hard to answer is what do we do to get justice for Brianna and Elijah? I was gonna ask that question last, but I wanted to know if you wanted to answer that now. If not, we can wait.
Yeah, I think we touched on it just a little bit, but I think that there's big acknowledgement that I think first we need to ground on what are we asking for when we say we want justice? What does that mean, really, at the root of what we're asking for? I think that we've had many, many people who've lost their lives due to state violence, due to community violence, due to being in a society that doesn't support its people. But also reminding that the individual cops, the individual police, the individuals, I call them slave catchers, that's what they are. Individual slave catchers, we should call systems what they are, who murdered them are behaving on behalf of upholding a system. They are nothing more than a tool. So being punitive and punishing individual officers, I don't think will make us feel better. And it certainly will not stop the next Brianna. It will not stop the next George Floyd. It will not stop the next Vicente Viela. That is not what justice looks like. Brian Stevenson does a talk about this where he says that the opposite of wealth, or the opposite of being poor or poverty is not wealth, but that it's justice. Most oppressed people have never experienced justice. They've never experienced what that means. What does it mean really when we're calling for it? Because we don't know what we're calling for. But I think what we're calling for is we're calling for an end to these kinds of lynchings happening in our communities. And how do we stop the lynchings in our communities? We do so by abolishing the systems that are doing the lynchings. And we do so by training and organizing our own community to defend itself so that those lynchings cannot take place in the first place. And so we have to break outside of that structure and that idea, that concept that the system somehow can be tweaked in a way that it can bring us justice. That's not real. But we can do things going forward now to prevent the next ones from happening. And that's where we will find justice. We will find justice when the killings end in our neighborhoods.
Thank you for that. So there's another question. Sorry, you have a lot of questions. You're very popular.
No, it's great. This is a fantastic conversation. I'm so happy having it.
Yeah, me too. And I love hearing it. And I agree. So the next question is kind of on the vein of when we kind of discussed capitalism. Is it necessary to deconstruct capitalism in order to abolish police and prisons? Might be a little
Absolutely. Hands down, absolutely, yes, absolutely. Those structures are nothing more than tools to uphold the system, the structure of racial capitalism. And the reason that I speak to capitalism so directly is because the structure of capitalism requires an underclass. It cannot exist without an underclass. So we cannot end slavery. We cannot end policing prisons and legalize slavery in the United States unless we dismantle the system that requires it.
Thank you for that. And there is another question asking if there's a Google Doc that was created for Albuquerque that lists all the options of resources for not calling the police. Do you know if there's one for Santa Fe? And how do we get that information into our community? That's something that we could probably work on as the Santa Fe community to sort of, I know there's a mutual aid fund, but that was a question that I saw, so.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's one in Santa Fe. You said that y'all could maybe jump in and start creating that. But we're absolutely cross-training and building our community defense teams here and building the structure that would have those lists. Now, it's important also to recognize that when you're doing revolutionary liberation work and you're challenging the very system that exists in the country that holds power, you will quickly become a target. And so the way we organize, we have to be thinking and cognizant about that, about how will Homeland Security respond when we create the structure that says, fuck your police, we don't need them anymore. We're doing our own thing over here. And when we tell the structure we don't want it, how will the structure behave to us? And most certainly, it will respond violently. We've seen that historically. We have seen many revolutionary leaders who have been taken from us by state violence. But I also think about what Huey Newton said, and he said that you can kill a revolutionary, but you cannot kill the revolution. And so when we think about how we set these structures up and how we are organizing in these structures, how do we create them? Right now, we have to be thinking about how we protect each other from state violence as we're building these structures. So we have a dual work that we're doing, right? In protecting against the 1.7 billion being spent against us in Homeland Security here. And so we would normally not just publicize. You can call Selinda during this period of time if you need a cop watcher. Although my inbox gets flooded, and it's good, it's a positive, it's a great thing. I don't mind being a person who's standing at the front lines who can receive those messages and help to activate teams to go out and do that. But I know I'm not sustainable to be the only person that's doing that. That's not real, right? And so as we're continuing to build these structures, It's more about the network, right? So if you're in this network, you will know who you can call as a street medic, because you'll be a network and you'll be with them in community. You will know who the cop watchers are in your community because you'll be in community and in network and doing the work with them. And so now it's about, if you're not connected, how do you become connected to all of the groups that are doing this work? And that's where you begin to know who you can call, who you should call, what porch can you land on in the middle of the night when you need support. And that's what it looks like right now. Now, that's the big imagination, right? How do we force this into a structure while we're dismantling it? That's the big work, and not create it into a reformist tool that then becomes more sophisticated, and Geo Group all of a sudden owns the new phone number that's called instead of police. So that's the thing we have to be thinking about, right? So how do we make sure that it does not get stolen from us by capitalism? Like everything else.
Right. Thank you for that. I don't know if Arte, if you have other questions on your end, or Oliver, but those are the questions that I sort of collected from the chat. But if not, if anybody else has more to add.
And things may come up later. So please feel free to email us. Again, it's millionsforprisonersnm@gmail.com. You can find us on social media on Facebook. My name is Selinda, Selinda, last name Guerrero. Our pages are Millions for Prisoners New Mexico. We have an IWalk New Mexico page. We have Building Power for Black New Mexico page. And we are vocal and out loud. So you'll be able to find us hopefully pretty easily, unless the feds are blocking us.
I did just want to add before we close that we've added the Millions for Prisoners PayPal link and the YUCCA Solidarity Fund to the chat. So if you guys want to show some love to either of those, or even share out those links, it helps put some resources towards this kind of movement work. And Walk the Talk is also planning to do, along with YUCCA, a lot more webinars like this. An upcoming webinar on the topic of abolishment on the 25th. The more info will be out on. And we're going to try to continue this kind of building of power and building of education. And just, again, thank you so much, Selinda, for gifting us and our community with your knowledge.
Thank you so much, so much. And I learned from you just as much in these conversations. So really, really appreciate the space, and look forward to doing more work together going forward. Big love.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It was an honor having you.
Thank you. So much gratitude. Yes.
Bye.
Bye-bye.